Welcome, everybody. Karen Edwards here. I am filling in for Heidi and Megan because they are celebrating a special event in Megan's life this week. She's getting married. So I am going to be your host today, and we're going to be talking about fleet management. You know, it's something that just about every contractor has, but we've never really talked about it. And there's some important things to know and considerations for you and your fleet. So joining me today are Seth Peach, Damian Katzenmeyer, and Rich Carroll. This conversation is sponsored by our friends at QXO. Thank you very much. And it's really appropriate conversation for today because it is Driver Appreciation Week. So thank you to all those drivers out there who get our supplies and materials where they need to be and get stuff to our job sites. We appreciate you. So let's get started. Seth, how about you introduce yourself?
Seth Peach I'm the president of Integrity Insurance and Bonding, located in the Happy Valley, Oregon area. So yeah, gone way back in the roofing industry. But on the insurance side, started my insurance career in about 2007 and been working predominantly with the roofing industry since 2009. So happy to be here.
Yeah, we're glad to have you because insurance is a big part of the conversation when talking about fleet and fleet management. All right, Damien, introduce yourself, please.
Yes. Good morning and go Beavers. Hey Seth, I didn't realize that. My wife is a grad of Oregon State. So,
I played
um,
baseball there, so yeah.
oh,
So
very nice.
actually part of the Beaver family and not the Ducks.
All right. Yes, right. So, hey, Damian Katzmar, VP of Fleet and Logistics here at QXO. Been in and around the industry for a little over right at 14 years now. Was a district manager with RSG, Roofing Supply Group in Beacon, for about 10 years. And then, like I said, the last 4 years have been here with QXO and the VP of Fleet and Logistics. Look forward to the conversation today.
Yeah, all right. And last but not least, Rich.
Good morning, everybody. I've been involved in the roofing industry since 1984. Worked a little bit in private equity and investment banking. Um, have had numerous companies with multiple fleets, and I am also looking forward to our discussion today. Right now, I'm the co-founder of Carroll Consulting, and we help small to medium-sized businesses grow. The one thing I do want to mention about driver appreciation week, one of the easiest things to do to appreciate your drivers is if they're assigned to a truck that's their truck, put their name on the door. They really get pumped up about that, and it's very easy to do with the decal. So go ahead and do that, and you'll get some good feedback from your team.
Great idea, Rich. I love that. Yeah, personalize it a little bit, make it special.
Yes.
Excellent. All right. So while we dive into this conversation, I am going to stop the screen share and we're going to ask the first question. Um, what, how many vehicles do you have to be considered a fleet? Seth, get us started.
Well, from the insurance company's perspective, a fleet of vehicles is five or more, and that's not including trailers. That's actually a vehicle, F-150, something like that. So you get fleet rated from an insurance company once you have five or more. Um, and that goes up to once you have five or more, that's when you're fleet rated. So it goes up to as many as after that, and it's still considered fleet. You don't get a special discount after that.
Anything to add? Damien, you guys have definitely a huge
Yeah,
fleet, right?
absolutely. Yeah. We have over 2,500 CDL trucks, another 400 or 500 pickups, and then all sorts of trailers and material handling equipment. So, I guess that, one question as I think back on roofers is, what counts, right? Do I have to own the asset, or what if I have a 1099 sales rep or someone who's out driving a vehicle with my company name on them, and maybe I reimburse them? Would those count in the five, or how does that work?
What counts is how many vehicles you have insured in your insurance policy. So if you have five scheduled vehicles in your auto policy, you're considered fleet rated by the insurance companies. So really, it just depends on how you know the how you're structured with your employees or your subcontractors or your W-2s or 1099s. Really what has to be, the common denominator is there has to be an insurable interest in that vehicle for your insurance company to apply coverage. So, I know a lot of owners will buy a vehicle in their personal name and try to insure it in their company name. Well, that's, there's never really too much thought in that because you're like, well, I'm the owner or I'm the president of the company. Of course, I should have my, company insure it. But there's not an insurable interest unless that owner or president of the company actually has a lease agreement between himself and his company. So it's very important to make sure that all of those, you know gaps, if you will, are dealt with and figured out. Otherwise, if there's an accident or a claim, the insurance company could try to deny coverage. And unfortunately, insurance companies are notorious for trying to find ways to deny a claim or reduce the coverages. So it's very important to talk with your legal representation to make sure that any sort of gap in like that is covered and figured out, so there's no issues from a coverage perspective.
And one thing I would like to add is if you have less than 5 vehicles, and you have a structured maintenance program, and you're doing tracking, some of your vehicles might still have compliance. So keep in mind that there's still other regulations that you might need to follow, even if you're less than 5 vehicles.
Yeah. We talked a little bit too about formal lease agreements. If you have a 1099 employee who's driving the vehicle. Do you remember what that was covering in our conversation the other day?
Yeah, I mean, just the lease agreements is just making sure that if there is somebody that owns a vehicle, but they're trying to insure it underneath the company vehicle because they're working for that company, whether they're a sales rep or a delivery driver or whatever. We just want to make sure that there's a lease agreement between the owner of that vehicle and the actual entity that's insuring it, the company that's insuring it. That's what we were, talking about. Just because if there's not an insurable interest with the insurance company to insure that vehicle, they won't. They will try to find ways not to cover a claim if something happens. So
Okay.
that's what the lease agreement conversation part was about.
Okay. And we've learned that the third biggest expense after labor and materials is fleet management. So Damian, can you talk a little bit about the total cost of ownership? Like these are things that you have to consider when you have that fleet and you're managing it.
Yeah, sure. So on the total cost of ownership, I think there's the obvious things. You have to buy the vehicle. And so how are you going to do that? Are you going to use capital and pay for it? Are you going to get a loan? Are you going to lease the vehicle? And there's all sorts of elements, pros and cons, depending on your business model, for how you'd want to go about doing that. So there's that. Then the next big bucket is obviously the run and maintain. So I've got to do the maintenance on the vehicle and I've got to keep up with that. When you keep up with your maintenance, you'll bring your total cost of ownership down. When you think, I'm going to skip the preventative maintenance this time and save the $200, rough month, or I'm a little behind the cat, whatever the reasons may be, ultimately you end up costing yourself more in the long run. With downtime, with the vehicle actually being down when it goes down, it's much more likely to. And then the cost of those repairs go up, right? So you got to have a scheduled maintenance program. You got to understand that. You got to understand how long is the vehicle going to last me? What am I using it for and what's the use case? How hard am I going to be on the vehicle? How much load am I putting on the vehicle? So, it may be a 5-year lifespan, but the way I use it's going to make it a 3-year lifespan and then plan accordingly to that. And then you want to tie all of that. Sorry, there's one more: fuel. Depending on where you are, the cost of fuel varies significantly across the country, but they run on fuel and they require the fuel. So what are we doing with it? Are we being efficient with the use of it? So all of those things kind of go together and give you the total cost. The other piece you want to make sure to do is balance, depending on how big your fleet is, balance when you buy and how you rotate the vehicles through. So if you have a big outlay and you buy 10 vehicles in 1 year, Well, in 5 years, when they're all due to be replaced, you're going to have a big outlay again. So think about that. You want to spread it over time if you can, or whatever works with your business. But that cost, if ignored, will reach around and bite you in the rear end if you're not paying attention to it.
Yeah, yeah. It's funny as you were explaining all of that in my mind, I'm thinking, well, this is what we tell building owners about their roofs, right? You got to do the maintenance twice a year. You got, what's your total cost of ownership? And I'm like, wow, if only we were thinking about our own fleets as we were telling our customers that they should with their roofs. And most contractors probably don't have a fleet manager. What are some tips and best practices maybe for taking care of their vehicles? How do you track that? How do you track that maintenance? How do you, is there software? I'm sure there's fleet management software for like QXO has got to be, with all the trucks that you have.
Sure.
But what if you have 7 or 8 trucks? How are you managing that?
Yeah, absolutely. And Rich, I'll kick to you after this. Maybe you've got some examples as well. But yes, if you do a simple Google search, you will find all sorts of fleet software tools that are out there. And they vary in capabilities from just tracking your expenses so you understand where your money's going to predictive AI that tells you based on the miles and the work you've done to the truck and how you're using it. Hey, this truck, it's going to break down in 3 months, right? So get ready. Take care of it now before it's a catastrophic type failure. And then we'll talk, I'm sure, later about some telematics. There's even a whole nother set of data points that you can grab and put into your software to help you track and understand the maintenance cycle of your vehicle and what's going on with it. So the biggest thing is just pay attention and not ignore it because it is a significant part of your business. If that's what you're going to use it for. And the other thing to remember is your name's on the side of the truck, most likely, right?
Mhm.
So it's a rolling billboard of your company and your representation. So nobody wants their truck broken down on the side of the road with their name sitting there on the side, showing everybody that hey, our vehicle broke, right? So
Yeah. Rich?
Well, yeah, and on top of that, safety and liability. If you're not maintaining your vehicles, there's always the safety and liability if there's an accident because of failure. But there is a lot of softwares out there. There's also some service softwares that you can adapt to if you have a small fleet, a few vehicles, that'll give you reminders to potentially go check the odometer to see where things are at. I've known people that also do spreadsheets, but there's a lot of new innovation out there. A lot of it's being created by the rental car companies because they want to be able to maintain exactly making sure their fleet doesn't break down. And so I do have a customer that's actually working on his own with AI to try to create something with cameras. So when their vehicles are coming in, they can actually monitor if there's any new damage, what's the wear on the tires, and also give reminders through email to check, when's the preventative maintenance time coming up. A lot of the newer vehicles already talk to us by phone. For some of us that have some of the newer, they remind us when it's time to have an oil change. So a lot of that stuff is merging in with the fleet maintenance program. So there's dozens of those programs out there. I would encourage you to do your research on what fits you the best and what fits the other systems that you already have to try to do some, software stacking where it might be talking the other software.
Yeah. Yeah. And the one you mentioned, I just want to elaborate on that because you told us the other day it's they have cameras in their facility or in their yard, and as a truck enters and leaves, it looks at it and it can say, well, it left this morning without that dent, and when it came back this evening, it's got a dent there now. So you need to figure out what happened or address that. So yeah, there's so much technology out there nowadays with their vehicles and the tools. And so Seth, I'd like you to talk a little bit about how insurance companies look at technology. If a contractor's got technology in their vehicles that are monitoring driving speed, monitoring sudden stops, filming out the front and back window, what does that How does that matter to the insurance?
Well, it matters significantly. Over almost the last 20 years, the number of insurance companies that still want to write or are aggressively writing roofing contractors has diminished. So the roofing industry is a tough trade to write the insurance for from just all lines, but the auto tends to be one that's difficult to write. And the insurance companies are starting to gear towards that. If you don't have the proper protocol in place, that's telematics, that's GPS, that's forward and rear facing cameras, that you may no longer be eligible to even have insurance through that carrier, or them even offer to offer terms or coverage for you. So the insurance companies are gearing towards having these requirements in place already before they'll even offer coverage. And that's adding a burden, because for some companies that's an extra expense. We understand that. And the insurance companies aren't giving discounts from a premium perspective because you have all these things. They're just allowing or to continue to offer coverage. But insurance companies do partner with third party vendors. So they may not give a discount on their insurance premiums, but if they use a certain technology, a telematics company or something like that, that telematics company may give you, 20% or 25% discount because you're insured with an insurance company that they partner with. So you can also get discounts on that, the technology piece, the safety pro piece, from the vendor you're using, because you have insurance through a different certain company.
Okay. And we had a question come in relating to maintenance. So I want to make sure that we just take a step back and answer that. The question is, how would you navigate the conversation if maintenance costs keep rising because you're trying to keep the vehicle till the end of the life? And then when you trade it in, you kind of get next to nothing for it. This person implemented a maintenance program a year ago, and they're seeing some trends, but they want to be proactive versus reactive. That's a tough question, right? At what point do you make that call? I don't know, Rich, you want to start us out there?
Well, one of the things that we focused on was what's the image of our vehicles, and we wanted to make sure our vehicles always looked like they were in tip-top shape. So we kind of put a mileage limit on, say, service vehicles, maybe a mileage limit on ops vehicles. Obviously, cranes and other things are kind of out of that purview. But you want it is such a tough question to answer depending on where you're at. But we try to put a program together where if we knew that we were driving 20,000 miles a year with our service vehicles, after 4 years, we needed to start replacing them. So like Damien said, if we staggered the purchases, we could build that into our budget. So that's what we try to do with a lot of our contractors, is when we're working on their budgets in the fall, what expenses are you going to have over the next 5 years for your vehicles? We also try to set a plateau on at what point are we spending too much on maintenance? Once again, that depends on the contractor, so I don't have a specific number for you. But at a certain point, the vehicle, your outlay is way more than if you've replaced it. So once again, it's really up to the individual, but having the conversation, with your people and trying to put a strategic plan together on your vehicles is at least you have a plan in place. It doesn't always follow the map you made, but it does give you some good metrics to look at when to make changes.
Yeah. Okay. I want to circle back to technology, and I want to talk about safety. And Damien, I'm going to look to you because you're using technology in your vehicles, but you had some really, I thought, pretty shocking statistics, especially when it comes to seatbelts.
Oh, seatbelts. Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. Yeah. So we've had telematics in our truck. So I'll just start. So we use one of the big telematics companies. We have telematics in our trucks. We made a change about 2.5 years ago to, an upgraded version. And with that, great reliability, 95, 98% of the time. All of them are working across 2,500 assets, 3,000 really counting pickup trucks. So great systems, great reliability. And then they start giving you information, speeding, heavy speeding, moderate speed, all the types of speeding, harsh braking. You can even get down to fuel efficiency and how a driver is driving, if they're aggressive on the truck, therefore, leading to less fuel mileage, those kinds of things. All sorts of things you can pick up from the telematics side. Even more impressive, about a year and a half ago, we started with the dual facing dash cams. And so you'll hear all sorts of conversations. Like Seth said, it's the way the world is going, and most of the world is already there. So there's a fear, hey, I'm going to lose drivers if I put cameras because they're spying on me. If it's a normal way of business, the sooner you start, I think, Rich, we were talking about a couple of days ago, the better, because your workforce sees it and grows with it. But the dual facing cameras really showed us a lot. And you're right, there's a couple of things. Our cameras have AI in them, and they give the driver nudges. They call them when they do something that they shouldn't be doing. Distracted driving, not looking at the road for 4 seconds or more. If you can imagine how far you go traveling 60 miles an hour in 4 seconds, a lot of things happen in that time, right? So it'll nudge them, bring awareness to them to stop or to start doing what they should be doing. It'll also nudge them or it'll tell them if they run through a stop sign. So, the California roll, as some of us like to call it, where we slow down, we look, but we still roll through the stop sign, and several other things. But the one that was amazing to us is seatbelts. And if you would have asked me, I would have said the seatbelt thing was kicked in the 80s or 90s. Everybody wears their seatbelts. Not true. And we found that once we put the cameras in, that 25 to 30% of our drivers were not wearing their seatbelt. And so the camera nudges them again, and then it tells their supervisor, and our supervisor can address it with them. So the good news is, once we put the cameras in, that at first 2 or 3 weeks, we see a lot of those nudges and a lot of the warnings, but they go away very, very quickly, right? And so the drivers start wearing their seatbelts and doing the things they're supposed to do. The distracted driving starts to decrease. All the right behaviors that you want to incent and you want to make sure are happening are starting to happen. And the drivers that are going to mysteriously, the fear is my driver's going to leave if we put these in. Those are probably the drivers you don't want to keep, right? When you think about it, if they're worried about wearing their seatbelt, they're worried about distracted driving and messing with cell phones and things like that, probably not the driver you want with your name on the side of their door doing things that could lead to serious injury. So, but yeah, so that's kind of been our journey so far, and it's trending in the right direction, knock on wood. So
Yeah. So we talked about, I think, about the cameras and the monitoring and the technology kind of being a double-edged sword, because if you're seeing unsafe practices or behaviors, you have to have, as an employer, right? You have to have process in place to address that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know several of them have this built into the software. Is it will store all the events for you, and it gives you the opportunity to sit down with the driver and actually coach and show them. It's not a disciplinary tool unless it needs to be, but it's a coaching of, hey, are you aware that you're doing these things? Let me show you. And most drivers are very responsive to it, to go, had no idea, like didn't even recognize it. It's a habit. I've been driving for 20 years. It's never been a problem. And they're right. It's not a problem until it's a problem, right? And so the feedback is actually, on the vast majority of them, really good. No idea that I was doing that. We coach, and then the behaviors improve. You're right. If you don't coach, the deposition, I can only imagine, looks very, very ugly. So you're telling me, Mr. Supervisor, Miss Supervisor, that you had the telematics, you see all these behaviors, and you chose not to address them. And that could be very, very bad for you, right? So vice versa, you don't have the cameras, and I'm sure Seth can talk to this quite a bit, is you don't have the cameras, the deposition looks something like, you knew your drivers were bad, that's why you didn't put cameras in, right? And so it's a bad position to be in either way. You want to have the cameras and do the right thing and talk with your drivers. Seth, I don't know if you had anything to add to that for sure.
No, you're 100% right. It's larger companies for one, that companies that do have a larger fleet, they are held to a higher standard. Um, Whether they know that or not, if an attorney gets involved because there's a pretty bad claim that happens, they are going to go for the throat if this protocol is not in place and you're not doing your, just your proactiveness to help. So it looks really, really negative if it's not in there. We're all here this morning. We understand there's a cost. We want to, spread the word about what can be done to implement this stuff. But I mean, at this point in time, if you don't have anything in your, like this that we're discussing in your fleets, I mean, it's time to probably get it, because it's the inflation of the claim is going to be, immensely increased if you don't have it, compared to if you do. And it doesn't mean that your claim would go down because you did have it, but at least drop the odds of having a severe claim and put your odds in your favor a little bit more.
Yeah, for sure. I'd like to talk a little bit, and maybe Rich, you can get us going about the folks that are driving your vehicles, because it's one thing to be just driving a pickup truck, right? But when you add a trailer, when you add, what are some of those things that contractors should be thinking about before they let somebody get behind the wheel?
Well, I mean, if you're putting a trailer behind a half-ton pickup truck and you're carrying a bunch of roofing materials, you're probably going to be over 10,000 pounds. If you have a crew cab and put 6 guys in there, you're probably going to be over 10,000 pounds. And that brings a whole slew of regulations in for DOT. Obviously, if you have a crane or something bigger that's over 26,000 pounds, then now you're talking about CDL type driving and following the protocol there. In order to You have to screen your employees. There's DOT physicals that be able to drive vehicles over 10,000 pounds. So you need to keep track of that to make sure all your people are being physical when they need to be physical. There's all kinds of requirements when you start adding trailers on to just regular vehicles, and I think it's very important that your drivers are aware of that. Because a lot of times they might have a truck at home and they're pulling a trailer every weekend or an RV or something, and they think they're fine. But what they don't understand is once they're in a business truck, that a bunch of different regulations come in. One of the things we did with one of my businesses is that we brought the state DOT in to speak during our safety meeting. And what do we look for on the road? Do you have a DOT number on your truck if you're pulling a trail? So they gave us a lot of advice on how to be more proactive with our vehicles. And when it comes from, a security level like a DOT officer, it has more impact than if it's coming from the office. This is what we need to do. The other thing I want to go back to is if you only have a couple of vehicles, that's the perfect time to start going to the telemetrics and the cameras, because it's not much of a change. Once you have 30 vehicles and you try to do it like I did, we had a lot of pushback. We don't want Big Brother watching us. You don't trust us. And we all know that's not the purpose of it. The purpose was about safety. The purpose was learning more about how we can maintain our vehicles. So once again, do it early. But make sure you do have somebody that's responsible for all your vehicles and knowing all the regulations. And if you're going state to state, if you're going from Washington to Oregon or Minnesota to Iowa, what are the responsibilities when you go cross state lines? Because they are different. Each state does have different regulations. Make sure you're complying with those rules as well.
Yeah. So from an insurance perspective, Seth, what should people be considering if they are going across state lines? Does that change the kind of coverage that they need?
Coverage wise, not so much. It just really depends on the GVWs of the vehicle, or the gross combined weight, on whether or not there's certain, federal filings or anything like that through DOT, or whether they're hauling hazmat or anything like that. So it's really just understanding on whether or not, if I'm crossing state lines, do I need a certain, filing to be able to do so? Do I do any sort of haul for hire? Because that, you know, that adds a whole different, dynamic to the insurance equation on things and your filings, so um it's relatively easy to not, to have insurance coverage even though you're crossing state lines. Like, we're 20 minutes from the Washington border, so we don't have to usually do anything special, but it's just making sure that, if there's certain filings, you have that, because we have a lot of police officers on both sides that are waiting for a contractor, towing a heavy loaded trailer, to pull them over. And I see it all the time, because they want to check to see if they have the right filings or whatever. It happens, I mean, daily, right on the borders.
Yeah. Yeah, I was wondering too about, a lot of along the highways, there's a lot of weigh stations, there's a lot of inspection points for commercial vehicles. At what point would a roofing company be affected by that? Or is that really more for the semis that are driving up and down the highways? Do you guys know?
That's a great question. I'm not 100% sure. I would think if you're rolling with a DOT number, um, you would probably need to stop if they tell you to stop. There's also best pass technologies and different types of things that allow you to go around some of those stations legally. But yeah, if you're supposed to pull into one and you don't pull into one, you'll definitely get stopped. You'll definitely get a
Yeah,
citation for that. So
it's
which will
it's
go
better to
against
pull.
which will
Yeah.
go against your FMCSA scores, right? So, or your CSA scores.
And can you just explain what those scores are that you mentioned right there? I don't know what those are. FMC.
Yeah. Yeah. So FMCS is the Federal Motor Carrier Standards Act or regulations, FMCR. Those are all the rules around DOT, right? And then so what they do is they take every stop and every um, crash and they put them into a database. There's a huge record. So you can go pull up any DOT number on the Safer website is what it's called, and you'll see how that company, how many trucks they have, how many miles they drive, how many times they've been stopped, and then how many times they've been cited in those stops. And so there's a couple of basic categories, like speeding, there's maintenance, there's crashes, there's hazmat. So there's the basics that show up there. They rate you on those, and then they compare you to all the DOT number holders, right? And they give you a total score, and then that score will be it's an ISS score, and that kind of tells the officer that says, hey, this company, they'll run it through their computer when they drive by you on the highway. Hey, this company is in good standing, they've got good records, and they're a safe fleet. You don't have to bother them. Then there's kind of an optional of, hey, if you got nothing better to do, go ahead and pull this truck over with this number. Or there's a mandatory, if they run it and they see your number and you're on the list of mandatory companies, then they have to pull you over and do an inspection. So you're being graded constantly if you have a DOT number. And it's your responsibility to fill out the MCS 150 as a form once every 2 years to update that. So they track all the others, and then you have to report your fleet size and your mileage and all the things that are going on. So
Wow.
again, another thing to think about if you're running trucks that are, registered with DOT number.
So what makes a vehicle required to be registered and get a DOT number? Is it weight?
Yes, it's the gross vehicle weight or length in some cases. But if you're going to hit the length, you're probably going to hit the weight. So it's the gross combined weight of the truck and trailer.
Wow. Okay. And this sounds to me like something insurance companies would be very interested in reviewing, Seth.
Unfortunately, they are. It's public information. When you're going through a DOT inspection or anything like that, that is linked to your US DOT number. It's very easy to fail an inspection. So you get that information put on your, basically your profile with US DOT. Insurance companies pull that if they know, which we have to disclose if you have a US DOT number or not. They'll instantly go to that website, look at the inspections, see if you failed any, or what your percentages are. And it's as simple as failing as having a low tire or a tail light out or something like that. So you may fail an inspection for something very minor, not even a major deal, but they'll still fail you. And then when the insurance companies, and you don't have inspections that often, so you may have only had, let's say, one or two in the last 5 years. I mean, you just never know how many are going to be showed up on there. So if you're running at a 50% failure rate because you had a tail light out, now all of a sudden you look like a bad risk to an insurance company. And that's where we have to go in and write a compelling story to make you look really, really good. So this whole conversation about having a fleet, management program, that's going to help you pass DOT inspections as well, because it's going to be able to catch these minor things that might flag a failure on an inspection.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's about safety too, right? Nobody wants to put anybody in harm. Your drivers are driving. We want these vehicles to be in the best condition, in the best shape, because everybody needs to go home at the end of the day.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the other categories, as I'm thinking through it now, is driver fitness and hours of service. So did my driver, as Rich said earlier, did they pass their DOT physical? Do I have my random drug screens in place? And then what's their hours? How many hours have they been working total for the week? How many hours have they been working and driving today, right? And there's rules and regulations around that. So if you've got someone, who goes to the job site before light at 6 a.m. and it's a long day and they're pulled over at 8 p.m., well, now there's a whole nother set of problems if they're in a DOT registered vehicle. So there's a lot to think about. There
Yeah.
really is.
Well,
And
I
so,
know. Wow. So many rules and regulations. So if you're a smaller contractor, it's not always about it sounds to me like, the DOT has those regulations for reasons, and a lot of it is around safety. So, if your vehicles aren't required yet to be registered with the DOT, it might not be a bad idea to look at their requirements and implement that anyway within your own smaller fleet.
Yeah,
I
I
would
agree.
agree.
I think that's a great idea. If you kind of mimic what their inspections are going to be required, and have your people walk around their vehicles, even if it's just a pickup truck or a sales car, walk around and check those things. Like Seth said earlier, if you get in an accident and you have a failure in your vehicle, the claim's going to be much higher. So being able to make sure a tail light's not out. So having those checklists, now once again, it's adding time, and it's costing you money to do so, but in the long run, it pays off.
Yeah, have you ever seen if you're flying somewhere, you see the pilot, he goes
Mhm.
out and he walks around the plane, right? I want him to do that. So, if I'm going to be on that plane. So there's no reason that, the person driving the vehicle can't give it a quick one over, right? Yeah. So
Absolutely.
what about documenting your processes and protocols? Because if you have a situation, is it a good idea? I would think it would be to put together, this is what our requirements are for any of our drivers, for our vehicles. Like you have this in a place you could show someone, an inspector, a safety person. Is that helpful?
Yes, I
Yeah.
absolutely think it is. I mean, we had our safety director review the inspection forms. Now, if someone walks around the truck and sees a tail light out, they were required to go back to the warehouse and notify the fleet manager. Of course, we were a larger company, and the fleet manager either issued another vehicle, or if it was possible, replace the burnt out bulb or whatever the situation was. In some cases, we had to take the vehicle out of service. Because the one thing you don't want to do is document that there's an issue and then go drive that vehicle. And it brings you right back to what Damien and Seth said before. Now you've known something's wrong, but you still allow the vehicle to be used. So it does open up another can of worms where, in this case, you might have a vehicle that's out of service for a day or maybe even longer, depending on what the issue is. But in the long run, it's going to pay off.
Yeah. Yeah, so advice for contractors who are in their early stages, because Damien, you're managing huge amounts of vehicles. Rich, you've done it before. Seth, you're insuring it. What are some tips and advice for, hey, you know what, I'm about to buy a fifth truck, then I'm going to have a fleet. What should I be thinking about or keeping in mind?
Well, what I would recommend is start as early as you can. Once it becomes routine, then it's easy. When you add another driver, they come into the fleet, you just plug them into the program. And it's not a big change. and then monitor and make sure that it's being effective. We always try to monitor our processes every year to see what adjustments we have to take. Is there new regulations out there? Once again, I think there's a lot of maintenance programs out there that do a lot of these things for you already. Maybe 15 years ago, we didn't have those things. We had to have reminders from HR, from the safety director saying this person needs a physical. Now you have software that does all that stuff for you and gives you a printout every month. Here's the people that need their physicals. Here's what's going on with your vehicles. So once again, my recommendation is to do it as early as possible, and then it becomes just second nature, and it's not a big process. The longer you wait, the more difficult it is to change the fleet, and the longer it takes. And if you haven't done it, start now, even if you do have a large fleet.
Yeah.
I
And then
would agree. And I was gonna say, I would tell you there are literally hundreds of companies out there that want to help you with this problem. And all of them, you don't have to sign a contract or a long-term agreement with them. Some of them you can just take what you've already got and say, hey, for an hourly charge, can you take 2 hours and review my plan and give me some recommendations? Some of them even have half-day or one-day workshops or seminars. You can Google these companies like Fleet Management, whatever, and you will get literally hundreds of them. I recommend you do it on Google, not on LinkedIn. If you do it on LinkedIn, you will get hit by 100 sales reps in the next hour. But yeah, look on there and you can find, you don't have to have a full-blown program, but you can have an expert look at it and help you find gaps and issues in your plan for really a minimal cost
Yeah.
as you start.
Yeah, I mean, contractors are experts in roofs, right?
Right.
Not in fleet management, not in contracts, not in taxes. And so we always say, hire that professional. Hire Rich. He's done it before, right? Yeah, so why try to set up the fleet management and your protocols and solutions by yourself? Why not consult an expert? I think that we often try to do things ourselves and then maybe we missed something, right? Or maybe we did it wrong. Yeah. Yeah. Or talk to your insurance person, right? Seth, I mean, you probably have contractors that are at that point where they're like, hey, I'm going to have more trucks now. So you do this all the time. You can make recommendations for them or tell them things that they should be considering, right?
Absolutely. It just goes into, our normal conversations because it's, one, it's very difficult to find a new insurance company if their current insurance company, non-renews or cancels their policy. So, ease of doing business for everybody is very important. So, and longevity with an insurance company is very important. So if you're bouncing around from a new carrier each year, every other year, that's actually not a good idea. So if you can have this protocol in place and this fleet management program in place and keep your insurance company happy in the long run, like we've been talking about, the long run is going to be a much better outcome in the end.
Yeah. And one thing that we didn't talk about that I want to make sure we mention too is I think Rich, maybe you brought this up the other day, when you're hiring people, you almost really want to check their driver record, right?
Yeah, anybody that's going to drive for you, you need to run an MVR. Obviously, you don't want to give them keys and you find out that for whatever reason, the insurance company needs to know as well because they might not be insurable. We've had some employees that your driving record was so bad, and unfortunately, we had already hired them. The insurance company came back after we pulled the MVR and said we can't insure them. So we had to go outside and buy a separate policy that's extremely expensive. So having an onboarding process, especially if they're going to end up driving, I would obviously on your onboarding process, you have you're pulling an MVR from for them and running it through just to see what kind of a driver they are. So absolutely.
Yeah, doing it before you bring them on board, even but during that interviewing process and background checks, MVR really needs to be a part of that.
Absolutely. And even if you're driving a bigger truck with a trailer, it might be nice to see them actually drive. You might be surprised. So if that's part of your process, to have a driving exam too, or a road test as we call it. So something to think
Oh,
about.
yeah.
Karen, there was one thing that you made me think of when we say roofers are experts in roofing and not in fleet. I think overarching for me, the more I think about the topic, is be mindful of what you want a fleet for, right? Kind of the example you were given, 4, now I'm going to end up with 5. Am I by happenstance turning into a fleet, or do I have a purpose of what I want to use my fleet for? Is it to reduce costs? Is it branding and advertising? It's for my sales. Like, what is the real reason you want to have a fleet in your company, and what is it going to do? And I think that'll really help you drive the economics of the business, as well as, okay, I've got to make sure, yeah, I'm willing to invest in the fleet so that it is an asset for me in the end of my business. Versus, hey, I've got 2 pickups today. Now I've got another employee. I got 3. Next thing you know, oh, I've got 7 pickup trucks or whatnot. I just walked into a fleet. So yeah, so that would be my one takeaway from this: is be mindful about, hey, why do I want a fleet and what am I going to do with it, right?
Yeah, that's a good point. Just because you hire a person doesn't mean that you have to buy a truck every time, right?
Right.
Yeah. So what about and this is not, I was just thinking, just because you hire a person, you don't have to buy a truck. If someone's driving their own vehicle to a job site, are there any considerations from an insurance perspective, Seth, that contractors should be thinking about?
Yes, there's actually that's one of your largest exposures that you don't think about. And I'm sure there's many on this, on this call, listening to this call is being like, you know what, this stuff is really overwhelming. I'm going to not ever have a fleet. I'm just going to require my sales reps and my employees to drive their personal owned vehicles for work purposes. Well, that is a way to get around all this stuff. That is one way. But you're as an employer, or you're as a company, you are still on the hook from an insurance claim through non-owned auto coverage or situations. That means that an employee is driving on your behalf for work purposes. Now, usually that's a personal lines policy covering that employee as an individual. In most cases, not all, personal lines insurance policies have lower limits, which means that your employee's driving down the road with maybe state minimum limits of, you know, 25,000 or whatever the state you're in that requires lower limits or allows lower limits, where a commercial auto policy may have, starting at a $1 million combined single limit, and then if you have an umbrella on top of that. So if your employee's driving on your behalf in their personal vehicle, their insurance is on the hook first. But if that insurance doesn't cover the full extent of the claim, the employer then gets brought in to pick up the excess damages. And if you don't have that coverage, or whatever, now all of a sudden you're stuck paying a claim out of pocket, and there's no way to monitor your employees, how they're driving their personal vehicles for your behalf, right? There's no cameras, there's no telematics. It just adds a lot of extra problems. And I'm personally dealing with, through some of my one of my companies that I work for, a very large non-owned auto claim that's pushing over $1 million in potential damages. So it's a major issue that I deal with on, unfortunately, a more common basis.
Wow. Yeah. Does it matter if they're on payroll versus a 1099, maybe a 1099 salesperson, or it just doesn't matter? They're on behalf of a company.
It just really depends on what you're, driving for, what your duties are. And it depends on what type of an attorney gets involved that can link that driver to you, right? So,
Yeah.
even when you think you have no exposure, that doesn't matter in a court of law or in the interpretation of an attorney.
Yeah. Okay. Woof. Gosh, this is heavy
Yeah.
stuff for this morning, isn't it? Wow. So here, on a lighter note, we do have a question. Are you seeing much adoption of electrical vehicles? This person's considering them for their service fleet, and there's curious if there's any real world feedback out there about companies that have done it. Rich, you look like you're about ready to answer.
I do have a company up in Canada that has several electric vehicles. And unfortunately, for them, being in the cold weather, it really affects the battery. So in the wintertime, which in Winnipeg is pretty severe, it does affect charging and distances. Um, but they figured out how to make it work. So I don't really have much information on how much they're saving because they've only been in this process a little over a year. But there are people out there that are really starting to move towards electric vehicles, especially if they can limit the distances that they're going each day. If they know they're going to a certain area every single day, then they're able to do charging. The one big thing that this company in Winnipeg is having issues with is they allow their people to take vehicles home. So now they're paying for charging stations at everybody's house. And if that
Oh,
person leaves the business, how do I get the charging station back? Do I leave it? And that's pretty spendy expense up front. So
yeah. Yeah, it is. Wow. Wow. And that just popped an insurance question into my head there, Seth. What if your employees are allowed to drive the vehicles home? Do you need additional coverage or different coverage?
No, but it is important because that's an underwriting question. It asks what the insurance companies ask questions of whether or not employees are allowed to drive, company owned vehicles home. So you just have to be open and honest. And I mean, supervisors or someone in the foreman role, that's usually not a problem. But if you're just allowing anybody and everybody to drive a company vehicle home, it gets a little bit harder from an underwriting perspective, but it's not additional coverages or anything. It's just an underwriting perspective. Um, but we did, going back to electric vehicles, we have run into issues with insurance companies, not wanting to cover maybe cyber trucks. And, in the recent, past, there's been problems with a lot of vandalism and thefts of Tesla vehicles just because of the political climate that has been going on. So there's waves in the insurance industry where they don't want to do certain things. And right now, I would say it's harder to get electric vehicles covered now versus maybe a year ago. Then it'll change, but right now it's difficult.
Wow. Yeah. All interesting.
And I would say too on the electric vehicles to add to the complexity of it is
Um,
on that total cost of ownership piece, right? You have the charging infrastructure, and depending on where you are, that's easily supported, and others it's not. You also got to think about what do I do when I reach the end of life of this vehicle, right? So there's not really a proven used electric market yet, right? And so how is that going to play, and what does that look like? Is there a battery recycler going to come along at some point that'll take those, or are you sitting with an asset that's now a liability for you when you get rid of it? And then lastly, I'll say if you have the telematics, almost all the telematics have a reporting that'll look at your fleet and say, hey, these 3 vehicles right here are great candidates for electrification. So they've even started to build in the math and the tools to say, hey, if you're going to look at all 10 of your vehicles based on their usage, how they're driving, the distance, all the things Rich talked about, these 3 should be your first candidate for electrification. So there's even some reporting out there that'll help you drive that decision making.
wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Good to know. Yeah, you're not alone. There's there's technology to help you. There's
absolutely.
the Seths and the Riches and even Damien, who's been doing this for a long time, to reach out to and ask questions. We are out of time, everyone. The hour just flew by, which is amazing. I want to thank QXO for sponsoring this conversation because it's really important information, and we want everyone to be prepared and be aware. I do want to give a quick plug for our next coffee conversations, which is 1 week from today. And that's going to be all about celebrating Hispanic Heritage Month. Hispanic Heritage Month was September 15th through October 15th. We've got a great panel of guests. Information is up on Roofers Coffee Shop. You'll be getting an email later today. So we hope to see you next week on that conversation. And I believe Heidi will be back for that one. So you won't have to worry about me fumbling around with the mouse here trying to figure it out. But thank you everybody for being here today. Thank you, Damien, Rich, Seth. It was really informational and educational, and I'm glad you were part of it.
thanks.
Great. Thank you for having us.
All right.
God
Thanks for
bless.
coming, everybody. We'll see you next time. Take care.
Enjoy
Bye-bye.
the rest of the day.